Today, we're talking about a plane that looks like it came straight out of a science fiction lab. But it's very much in development in the real world of aeronautics. JetZero's blended wing body, a kind of hybrid creature halfway between an airliner and a flying wing that would almost make our current Airbuses and Boeings look like relics of the 20th century. Why is a startup taking on an architecture that's been studied for decades but never yet developed on a large scale in commercial aviation? How does JetZero aim to fly a full-scale demonstrator by 2027 with a relatively modest budget? And, most importantly, can these announced gains really materialize without turning the passenger experience into a nightmare? To understand JetZero's approach, you need to step back and forget for a moment the tube and wing design that has dominated commercial aviation since the 1950s. This design works, it's reliable, profitable, and perfectly mastered, but it's also the result of compromises accumulated over more than 70 years. The blended wing body concept, or BWB, is not a pure flying wing like the B-2 bomber, but a much more nuanced hybrid architecture. Here, the fuselage is no longer a cylinder sitting on wings. It widens, flattens, and actively contributes to lift. In other words, what is mainly used to transport passengers finally begins to seriously help with flying. In a conventional aircraft, the fuselage contributes very marginally to lift and mainly contributes aerodynamic drag. The wings do the heavy lifting, while the tube just goes along for the ride, like an aerodynamic backpack that wasn't always cooperative. In a BWB, almost the entire airframe becomes lifting. According to simulations and studies published by JetZero and by previous research programs, this type of configuration could enable very significant fuel consumption reductions, sometimes claimed to be up to 40 to 50% compared to aircraft to comparable sizes. Let's be clear, this figure remains a theoretical target based on models, not a promise etched in titanium. But in an industry where you fight to scrape together 1% here, 2% there, even the hope of such a leap is enough to awaken a lot of interest. This potential rests on solid aerodynamic logic. Fewer parasitic surfaces, less interference between wing and fuselage, hence reduced overall drag. Less drag means less thrust required, thus less fuel burned for the same mission. Said like that, it's almost too simple to be true. And precisely, if this design hasn't already filled the skies, it's because reality always catches up with beautiful principles. The main obstacle remains pressurization. A cylinder pressurizes naturally and uniformly. A wide, flat, non-circular airframe undergoes much more complex structural stresses. Here, JetZero's banking on progress in composite materials and carbon structures capable of absorbing these forces without turning the plane into a flying anvil. Technically possible, yes. Easy? Certainly not. JetZero isn't playing this game alone. In August 2023, the startup secured a contract worth approximately $235 million from the U.S. Air Force to develop a full-scale BWB demonstrator. For the U.S. military, the objective is very concrete: drastically improve the efficiency of fuel and cargo transport over long distances. An airport capable of carrying payloads comparable to those of a 767-type aircraft while consuming significantly less would represent a major strategic logistical advantage. In a context where every refueling counts, especially over vast theaters like the Pacific, this kind of gain is a game changer. The demonstrator, whose first flight is currently planned around 2027, is not intended to be certified for passenger transport. It's a flying proof of concept. A full-scale airborne laboratory. To limit risks, JetZero plans to use existing engines from the civil market without developing experimental propulsion. Several options are under study, but the idea remains the same. Don't pile up unknowns. Testing a radically new airframe is already ambitious enough without adding a revolutionary engine that is never flown. Behind the project, you find profiles from the traditional aerospace industry and advanced research programs, as well as strong industrial partnerships. JetZero is notably relying on scaled composites, the company historically founded by Burt Rutan and now integrated into Northrop Grumman. Recognized for its mastery of complex composite structures, this partnership changes the nature of the project. We're no longer talking about a nice 3D render meant to raise funds, but indeed about an industrial program with real parts, tooling, and very concrete constraints. But making the plane fly is only half the battle. The other half takes place on the ground, where aeronautics meet the harsh reality of airports. Global infrastructures are optimized for tube and wing aircraft. A BWB is, by definition, much wider. JetZero indicates that its first commercial model would aim for a wingspan comparable to that of an Airbus A330 in order to remain compatible with certain categories of existing infrastructure. On paper, this limits the damage. In practice, the width of the cabin raises real question about interior layout. We're no longer talking about 3 or 4 seats per row, but potentially much wider blocks. For passengers far from the sides, the absence of a window becomes inevitable. Solutions like screens displaying an external view are being considered. It's an appealing concept art, a little less reassuring when you wonder how the human brain reacts to a virtual horizon during turbulence. Let's just say that air sickness could become an Olympic sport if it's poorly managed. Emergency evacuation's another critical point. Regulations require a complete evacuation in 90 seconds, with half the exits unusable. In a very wide cabin, quickly moving passengers to the side exits requires a completely redesigned interior architecture. Concepts mention multiple longitudinal aisles and compartmentalized areas almost like small amphitheaters. Nothing impossible from a regulatory standpoint, but everything remains to be demonstrated through real tests. On the other hand, this volume could offer more space, higher ceilings, and a very different cabin feel. JetZero's timeline's very ambitious. After the military demonstrator in 2027, the company mentions a commercial entry into service in the early 2030s. On the scale of aviation, that's practically tomorrow morning. To achieve this, JetZero emphasized a design aiming for high industrial standardization. The goal is to limit complexity, reduce maintenance costs, and reassure airlines, which are traditionally allergic to technical surprises. The concepts presented mention capacities on the order of 250 passengers for the initial versions, with possible evolutions on the longer term. But caution's needed. No complete family of aircraft is officially defined yet. The idea of modularity is appealing, but it will have to survive the reality of certification and mass production, 2 areas where aviation rarely forgives excessive optimism. The main risk remains financial. Developing a new commercial aircraft from a clean sheet typically costs several $billions. Military funding helps get the momentum going, but it won't be enough to cross the finish line of civil certification. JetZero will need to attract major industrial partners or raise considerable capital. Aviation history shows that this type of bet is rare, long, and risky, but not impossible. Institutional support and the interest of major airlines gives the project a credibility that few aerospace startups have ever achieved. In the end, JetZero symbolizes an interesting evolution in the sector. The blended wing body is not a miracle solution and will not alone replace sustainable fuels or other energy breakthroughs. It's a complementary piece in a global strategy for emissions reduction. If the 2027 demonstrator confirms even a portion of the expected aerodynamic gains, it could reopen a debate that the industry had set aside for decades. The road remains long, fraught with structural tests, wind tunnel campaigns, and regulatory negotiations sometimes more complex than aerodynamics itself. But for the first time in a long while, the shape of an airliner no longer seems dictated solely by industrial heritage, but by a deliberate pursuit of overall performance. JetZero has already achieved something essential, reminding us that the tube and wing is not a law of nature. The future of aviation might not have a window for everyone, but it could well adopt a silhouette radically different from what we thought was immutable. That concludes this analysis. Thank you for following along to the end. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and share your opinion in the comments. New episodes are coming very soon, so remember to subscribe and hit the bell. See you very soon.